Mathieu Cailler. I'm a writer of fiction, poetry, children's books, and this is my first novel, Heaven and Other Zip Codes. Sixth book overall, first novel, so it feels pretty good to have it out and at home in the world. It's a contemporary love story centering around four characters, um, and it kind of is told from each person's point of view. So the point of view rotates, which is kind of fun. So we have a young boy named Theo, his mother, Searcy, and then you have Theo's stepfather, Hoit, and then a tutor that Searcy hires to work with Theo, named Mr. Toffler or Emerson. And it rotates, and we kind of see Emerson get a little too involved with the family for whom he works. So that's pretty much it. So it's a fun book. I think it was a really beautiful thing, thanks to Raquel actually, who is the founder and creator of Writers Atelier and Black Fox Literary Magazine, and one of the greatest humans ever. Um, we've stayed in touch for a long time, ever since I published a short story back in, I don't even know what it was now, maybe 2016, maybe 2014, something like that, of in Black Fox called A Poodle in the Desert. And Raquel's just become a dear friend and everything. And it's been really great. So I chatted with her about this book long ago and thought I had written something romantic. And then she asked me this really great question saying, is it romantic or is it a love story? And that kind of really helped me shape this into kind of an old-fashioned love story, which is not romance in the literary world. So even though we think of these things as kind of akin to one another, they're quite different. So yeah, it's a beautiful story, and I'm very happy that the story with Raquel really kind of helped me figure out kind of what the book was about. Sometimes as writers, we write, we don't really necessarily think about exactly what we're writing or the audience for who we might be writing. We just write to write, and the marketing side and everything is it's nice to have friends that can help you with that. And Raquel was so great and always has been. So yeah, as I'm reading, I'm just going to read a kind of short, maybe 6, 7 minute selection from the book. Um, so as I talked about earlier, the tutor, Mr. Toffler / Emerson, starts working with Theo and gets a little too involved with the family, and it ends up that Mr. Toffler is a painter, and so the mom asks if he wouldn't mind taking Theo out to paint every now and again. So this is one of the few scenes in the book, and where they actually go out to paint, and it's kind of it shows a little bit of their relationship and how Emerson finds himself a little bit in this pseudo fatherhood, which is kind of what happened to me that inspired the book. I wanted to become a writer long ago and knew that I'd have to not be a full-time teacher in order to write during the morning. So I started my own tutoring business and found myself really involved with these students and caring about them. And you find yourself sometimes in this like pseudo fatherhood role that Emerson certainly does. All right, here we go. Emerson told Theo about the spot where they'd chosen to paint, a place suggested by Madame Fournier, only a half-mile from Abalone Cove. It was called Portuguese Bend, a serpentine road that was built atop an active fault. Because of the constant seismic activity, plumbing pipes were exposed above ground, and every couple of months the city brought in construction crews to repair the torn asphalt. What Emerson loved about the area was that no one bothered painting here due to the road's volatile nature. Clusters of fennel and mustard plants carpeted the hills, and whenever the wind worked eastward, a trace of anise hung in the air. Emerson watched the boy's eyes widen with every tidbit of knowledge regarding a plant, or a bird, or the endemic Palos Verdes blue butterfly. When you live somewhere, you know nothing about it. It's just home, Emerson said. All the history just comes with it. Then someone comes to town and tells you everything about it, and you're there, just shrugging your shoulders like, okay, yeah, whatever. I know that's how it was for me in Vermont. People would tell me about maple trees and tapping for syrup, and I'd be like, okay, cool, pass it over. My waffles are getting cold. Were you a good kid? Theo asked. He painted the curvy line of Portuguese Bend, paying attention to the shapes that jutted into the road. No, Emerson said, I got into trouble a lot. What's the worst thing you've ever done as a man? There's a lot of time left for that one, Emerson said. I'm only 26. Emerson mixed white into blue, trying to pinpoint the sky's shade. How about you? I once stole a Snickers from the market down the road. Yeah? My mom said I couldn't have it, so I just put it in my pocket. It was easy, but I felt bad about it. So I told my mom and she made me take it back and apologize. Look at you. Yeah. Theo got back to work, working his brush in gentle strokes, staying steady in one portion of the canvas for a long time. He detailed what could later be filled in, and Emerson felt his limbs tingle as he took in the boy's work. It was the first time in his life that his passion had been caught by someone else, that he'd successfully passed his love on to another person. More often than not, he had to find a way to talk about painting that would make others feel included, comparing it to their passions, fantasy football or bowling. But painting was not fantasy football, nor was it bowling. The light is prettier here than in any other spot we've painted, Theo said. Is it always like this? It's always interesting, even when it's not sunny, even when it's not bright or warm. Since Emerson had many depictions from this location, he didn't paint the ocean or road, opting instead to draw Theo. He didn't tell him because he thought it might distract Theo from his own work. So Emerson worked from memory most of the time, refreshing his imagination every now and then by stealing a peek, especially when he needed a specific detail, like how the boy was holding his brush, or how his hair was sitting on his ears, or how his shoelaces were moments from coming untied. I wonder why no one else paints here, Theo said. They're not as smart as us, Emerson said. Hey, have you ever been to Dominic's Steakhouse? No, nice? It's good. I went there with Hoyt and Mom the other day. I hear it's good. They have girlfriend dishes, so that might be good for you. You know, to bring Carly. What do you mean, girlfriend dishes? Like oysters? I don't know. Some of the things on the menu had GF written next to them. Things guys can order for their girlfriends, I guess. Emerson set his brush down on his easel. I think that stands for gluten-free. Oh God, that makes so much more sense. I thought it was weird. I mean, girls love pasta, and it wasn't picked as a GF item. After their laughs settled, the only sound that could be detected was the sigh of wind, and Emerson turned toward Theo to see exactly how the boy's legs were bent. Theo, Emerson said in a whisper, I'm being really serious right now. Do not move, okay? What? Do not move, Emerson said. I need you to listen to me. I need you to trust me. Emerson stared hard at a spot a few feet behind Theo, coercing the boy to line his eyes with the dusty rattlesnake, whose split tongue licked the air. Be still, he said again. He heeded his own advice, too. His mouth tightened, his molars adhered, saliva pooled in the back of his throat. The snake, however, disregarded the instructions, inching its way closer to Theo, its rattle now up and shaking, the sound of its heavy scales grating the dirt. Theo quivered. Mr. Toffler, he said, his right Nike slipping loose. And just that, the sound of rubber against earth, startled the snake. It struck at once, a flash from the ground, its mouth wide, fangs plunging into Theo's calf. Shit, Emerson yelled, as the snake slithered into a patch of tall grass, its taupe body blending into the weeds. The rattle stopped, but Emerson still heard the sound in his ears. Emerson knew panic wouldn't help, but his insides were knotted. Sure, he'd seen a sign warning of snakes in these parts, but he'd seen so many signs in his life and never actually spotted the thing they warned against. Task and then another task, he thought. He needed to view everything as step by step. Get Theo to the car. Take him to the hospital. Stay calm. Lucky for Emerson, Theo was light, so Emerson flung the boy over his shoulder before tearing up the hillside to the car. His legs churned and prickled. Even though life was more important than usual, the tick of seconds he found possessed a slow motion quality, and his actions were deliberate. Keep talking to me, Emerson said. How are you feeling? He said, dropping the boy into the passenger seat. Before he knew it, he whipped the car around, nearly taking out a fire hydrant, and peeled onto the main road. The hospital isn't far, Emerson said. Not far at all, just down here. He ripped the shifter back, and the engine growled behind him as he zoomed past cars over double yellow lines. How's Fallon doing? Emerson asked. His voice rushed. He took a turn hard enough to make the tires scream. Theo held on. Is this really the best time for this conversation? She's good? That's good. Am I going to die? Theo asked. Is this the kind of thing that kills people or just deforms them forever? Emerson ground gears and downshifted into second around a tight bend. Color drained from the boy's face. You're not going to die, Emerson said. So you're doing okay? What are they going to do to me at the hospital? I don't know. It's getting really big. Look. Does it hurt? Yes, and it's numb too. Shit. Emerson pummeled his horn, then darted through a stop sign after scanning the traffic. If anything, we're both going to die on this drive. Hey, Mr. Toffler, Theo said, if I do die, can you tell my mom that I love her? Emerson honked again and flipped a guy off. Sure, buddy. And the boy added, his voice low, can you tell yourself that I love you too? Even with the Volkswagen's RPMs high, Emerson heard the boy's sniffles, so he reached over and cupped Theo's head, feeling his soft hair against his palm. He let the words hang in the cabin, careful not to say something that would scare them away. Thank you. They're just a little selection of a moment when the two of them really start bonding, almost like I said, in this kind of pseudo fatherhood role, which I found myself in at some point not that long ago. You know, the boy's husband or the boy's stepfather travels a lot, and Searcy's kind of in a weird position where she has this like kind of idyllic life with her boy and this stepfather for Theo, but then Emerson comes in and kind of shakes things up a little bit. And as Raquel wrote, she actually has this beautiful blurb in the book, which I loved because sometimes you know what you wrote, but when people write about it for you or write about it in terms of a blurb, you end up kind of seeing the work in a new way. And so Raquel wrote that it's a story about the tremendous bravery it takes to choose happiness and follow your heart. And I hadn't really thought about that, but it is kind of like sometimes I think we are a little scared to say yes to things just because we know uh, like happiness is really what we're after many times. But sometimes if you say yes to things, it opens up new challenges, and we're kind of in a place where we enjoy comfort many times. So that is certainly played out in this book. I'm going to read a little bit of these comments here. I'll go back. This is a contemporary love story, but did you have to do any research to write it? How long did you spend researching? Also, what did you learn? There must have been some pretty interesting lessons in creating these characters. Yeah, that's actually a beautiful question. I didn't. I did do a good amount of research in terms of, you know, it's told from four points of view, so that's kind of interesting because you have to try to make every voice sound authentic. And so Searcy is like extremely religious, and I grew up quite Catholic, so I have like a little bit of that background, but I wanted her to be like far more pious than I am and all that. And so um, I found myself kind of reading Bible verses and trying to see what would appeal to her. Um, I think a lot of people turn to religion when they can't turn to other people, and so Circe certainly has that, where she feels comfortable to talk to God, and I had a little bit of that I had to research. Hoit is works for PR, so I wanted to make sure that sounded really authentic. Emerson's a painter, and so I wanted him to use um, words for color that I thought only a painter would know, like cerulean blue or saffron or whatever it might be. I felt like painters probably see the world not in green and yellow and but in emerald or fuchsia or more interesting colors. So that was interesting for me, and also just the names of certain artwork. And then Theo, Theo's probably, I think when people read the book, they probably see me as the tutor because I was in that, and if you know me, but I kind of see myself in Theo a lot, like how close he is with his mother. I know I had that kind of relationship growing up with my mom, where he's kind of embarrassed to be a mama's boy, so he feels like at home he can be comfortable and like adore his mom without people bothering him or teasing him. So there is a little bit of that. And so, yeah, I did kind of have to do a touch of research. And it probably took me, I don't know, I kind of researched at the same time as I wrote, but it probably took me 4 years to write the book. And the first draft was a beautiful mess where I could kind of go back and look at what I needed to improve. So it's a good question. Did the story unfold for you in scenes? If so, which came first? During your writing, did you have any of the characters change dramatically from how you imagined them? Did you have them make a playlist? Yeah, I definitely. That's so interesting. I kind of saw the beginning of the book didn't actually change too much. I really wanted it to be the first time Emerson comes to the house, and they were kind of waiting, the boy and the mom are waiting for the tutor to arrive. Um, in the first page, it says that Searcy found that it kind of strained her relationship with Theo to work on homework, which was pretty much the reason I was hired almost all the time when I started doing that. It wasn't that the boy or the girl couldn't do the homework, and it wasn't that the parents couldn't, teach second grade math, but that relationship was a little bit difficult. And so I wanted that to be like kind of the beginning there. And then it was funny because I originally wanted Theo to be the narrator. I originally wanted Emerson to be the narrator. And eventually I kind of fell in love with all the characters by writing various scenes and was like, oh, I think they all need to talk. And I think they all need to express how they're feeling in the moment and kind of all the things that are done behind the scenes that people don't see. Will have a better understanding. And, everyone's motivation needs to be explored. And it was fun to write, especially I come from the kind of short fiction and poetry. So I wrote it in kind of these bursts of like 2,000 word chunks and really enjoyed exploring characters in that way. Um, yeah, and I did. I had kind of a playlist of sorts that I made where I would write down who I had heard from right before. So I had this huge chart that made me look really insane at my house, I'm sure, where I had like E, S, the first initial of all the characters, so I never repeated them. I wanted to make sure that the reader was always hearing from a fresh person. And it kind of is nice because it creates a little bit of drama inherently because you leave readers hanging. Like Kim writes, so what happened to Theo? The scene ends right there, and then we take off from Circe, the mother's point of view, at the hospital once he's arrived. So now we kind of explore the rattlesnake bite through that. Um, and it creates a little bit almost of a film quality where there's different scenes kind of being, someone told me long ago with film that the narrator is the camera. I always thought that was interesting. So this book kind of does that. It kind of redistributes point of view in a cinematic way, I think. But these are things you obviously don't think of that much when you're writing a book. You just got to plow ahead. And then as it gets a little bit more cohesive and the drafts start getting together a little more, you can kind of get there. And I love writing voice. I think that's why I'm addicted to short fiction and writing it, and why it's like been a big part of my writing life is that I liked writing, different characters and creating a voice. But yeah, when you do that in a novel, you're kind of like setting yourself up for I'm going to have to keep this voice authentic for four different people for 80,000 words. So that was a challenge in and of itself, but also really fun. There were days where I think writing Theo for me was really fun. I loved his innocence, and also he's kind of an old soul and kind of beautifully weird and bullied, and I liked writing him very much. I remember waking up with a lot of enthusiasm when I knew I had to write his scene, so that was fun. See, Raquel says the characters in this novel are very complicated. Can you talk a little about them? Any tips for writing for writers trying to create complex characters? Oh, that's a really high compliment. Thank you. Um, yeah, I think, to make people 3D, they have to have, and no one's all good or all bad. So you have to keep that in mind. You can't make your villains too evil all the time. Um, you know, they. I remember someone saying like even Mussolini was a good tipper or something. Like everyone has some quality that you can kind of explore, or you can give a rough character a sweet smile or dimples or whatever it might be to try to soften them. It's like people try to in early drafts you go all in on the good and all in on the bad, and then as you progress you can kind of pull back and say, okay, like maybe this doesn't have to be all in every time for this villain or whatever it might be. Um, I also think like exploring people's motivations for why they do things. There's a reason we are forgiving in literature. It's because we know everyone's motivation, the whole story. So we might say, oh yeah, this person did this, in this movie or in this book, but early in this person's life, this was done to this person. So we're way more understanding of someone's struggle, backstory, motivation, all those things that really play into creating a real character. Whereas sometimes if you see someone on the street do something, there's a line in the book about Theo that he says if everyone wore like a bumper sticker on their back explaining their childhood, that maybe we'd be more forgiving when we saw someone at the grocery store, or if someone cut us off. I do feel that way. So tips for trying to write complex characters are just to kind of hone in on backstory and how it kind of manifests through someone's life. Writing multiple point of view, yeah, the voice is really interesting. So I would say uh, I kind of came into it by accident because I loved each character, and so as I was trying to write it, the book kind of told me like, hey, we need to hear from Theo. And after, it's kind of fun, like a good exercise might be to write from the point of view of each character in your novel. Um, Raquel has a beautiful book, Holiday on Park, where we hear from two characters, so she's familiar with that too. And I think if you write and explore from each character's point of view, then you're more apt to probably keep them. And once you've written like a few pages for each of them, the voice starts to crystallize a little bit. And if there are very stark differences between each character, then I think you're in a good position to kind of try to do a story like that if you want. Or even if it doesn't, even if after the exercise you say to yourself, no, I really want uh, this woman Tanya to be my protagonist all the way through, at least exploring those other points of view will help when you get to those sections or when you have to introduce them. They'll have their own voice, whether it's through dialogue or whatever. So nothing's really lost in the writing. It doesn't always appear in the novel. You know, to write an 80,000 word book, you have to write 400,000 words or 500,000 words and whittle it down. But those 500,000 words aren't lost. You know, they help. So like at one point, I had Searcy go into dental school early in this draft, and you know her exploration of USC dental school. None of that made it in the book. She's not a dentist, but having that background for her, I kind of bumped into some things that crystallized her character a little bit that only I needed to know. I would say it took about in the fall, I think, of 2015, I wrote this as a short story um, that I actually shared with Cheryl, which is funny. And she shared it with me not too long ago, that email. It was funny. It was called Homework. I also shared it with my friend Tim, and it was kind of a mess, but I knew there was something in there that I wanted to explore. And then, you know, Cheryl gave me great feedback. Tim said that reason I was unsure of it is because I wrote a novel in 45 pages and that the container was not big enough for the story. And that kind of sat with me for a while because I knew maybe I had bumped into a novel and I was a little scared. And then I don't know when it happened, but I think in the fall of 2016, I kind of found myself without a big project. I had published some stuff and I wanted to start a new project. And I looked at that and thought, well, let's see, let's give it like 8 months and see like where we land in terms of the first draft. And it was surprising. It only took like 4 months to get a bad first draft out. And from then I kind of felt like I could take it. So I'm glad. I'm not surprised Kim is a great writer. Let's see here. Influence your writing. Yeah, my gosh, there's so many people, and every time I answer this question, it like changes. It might change tomorrow. Um, I'm really interested in like writers that are accessible and keep it simple. And I was thinking about this the other day, talking to a student, how much I think reading the LA Times sports section from the time I was like 9 really influenced my writing, just because it was so direct. Um, and there was a specific columnist named Bill Plaschke who writes for the LA Times, still does. He doesn't write the nicest stuff about the Lakers, and so I've kind of developed this love-hate relationship with him because I love his writing on a prose level, but I kind of hate his point of view many times. But he always used like really good verbs and kind of short, crisp sentences, and I found myself just kind of loving that in all sorts of authors then from that point forward, whether it was like Jack London or Maya Angelou, um, or like Lucille Clifton's poetry. Um, I know like Raymond Carver had a tremendous effect on me and kind of his bare minimalist prose. And I've always tried to kind of put it through a filter like that. You know, clarity is very important to me. So I don't try to like blow people away on flash. Even if I have pretty sentences, I kind of say to myself, is it needed or is this just for me? I always kind of think about narrative, like, is the story really clear? Are people engaged enough? That kind of thing. I hope that answers that question. Yeah, I think the book and the work will always, it's weird. The story to me tells you how it wants to be written. People say like, "Oh, you write kids books, you write poetry, short stories," and I'm like really happy that impresses people. For me, I'm just like, "Oh, it's I think of a story and then the story kind of tells me, "Hey, this is how I want to be told." And I kind of try to shut up and listen, you know. I had a story come to me not that long ago that I thought would just be like a really good visual story, so I wrote it as a screenplay. Um, it's a weird thing that happens, but if I can see it and that kind of thing, this story just after Tim said that, I said, yeah, I think I wrote a novel. I'm scared to death of writing a novel. It was like it's kind of a big deal for a writer. I don't know why, but the novel feels like very significant. Even if you write like a 300-page short story book, I don't think people resonate with it as much as a novel. So I knew that I needed to do that at some point in my writing life. Yeah, the characters will speak to you. You know, I've written a lot of short stories and things where I think it's going to be in third person. And by page two, I am subconsciously using the I pronoun and I don't even recognize it. You know, it's like the story kind of pushes you, and all of a sudden I'm saying I, and I haven't even thought about it. And then I get 4 or 5 pages in, I reread it, and I say, oh wow, I changed it. I went from third person to first person without knowing it. That is a sign that this story kind of wants to be told in first person, that the voice is rich enough to carry that narrative, and I stick with it. So when those little accidents happen, there's like that old adage of when art speaks, just try not to interrupt. I I really believe in that, even though it sounds a little corny and very like Hollywoody or something. But there is some truth to it. Will you talk about the cinematic quality of your scenes, landscape, neighborhood, house, automobile descriptions? Oh, what a great question. Yeah, I think especially with this book, because we were switching, every I would say 1,500 to 2,000 words was the kind of the limit I tried for most of the book. Sometimes as the book goes on and towards the end, it's more like 1,000 words per scene because I wanted it to get a little more dramatic. Um, so the scenes were a little shorter, but I think I had to drop people in to kind of new scenes just like a movie does and kind of quickly set the tone. So when we were painting with Theo, I had to get quickly that they were painting a certain place with the ocean and the weird road. Um, and then, when Searcy in the next scene, she's going to enter the hospital. So I just needed like quick bursts that would identify with the reader and kind of give a visual cue as to, hey, we're in a hospital. We know what these look like, the squeaky floors, the bright lights. Everything seems very sterile and clean, and there's lots of noises, even though there's really no specific noise. We hear lots of beeps and rushing. So just kind of trying to use all five senses. I think I always teach when I'm teaching like young writing classes, I always say to write, if you're writing a scene that needs to be visual or that needs to be cinematic, uh, I always draw all five senses on the top, a little eye, a hand, all those things. And I try to touch on those senses if I can. Sometimes taste is very hard unless people are eating, but um, I think sometimes writing can be too visual. So I try my best to include sounds and scents. I feel like sometimes writers and fiction will go 20, 40, 50 pages and no one will smell anything. And I think that's a little weird. So I always try to think about the five senses a lot when I'm writing, especially on the rewrites. There was a nice blurb someone wrote about how the story feels contemporary but also deliciously old-fashioned, and I really thought that was sweet. I'm kind of an old-fashioned guy that way, so I'm not really great with computers or anything. So this story was kind of Theo, the boy, kind of feels old because he's a little bit of an old soul, and so he plays chess. That's like his favorite game, and he's like his best friend ends up being the tutor. So there is kind of a little bit of an old man quality to even the youngest character. And Emerson is kind of an old soul as well. He drives an old Carmen Ghia Volkswagen, and he wears like suspenders and stuff. So there's a little bit of that. And yes, I had to slip in the Lakers. What a horrible night that was. I thought it was going to be better. I think the Lakers did too, and I think that was the problem. So tomorrow we'll see how it goes. I still feel okay, but it was a tough night, and I'm trying to be upbeat right now. But there was lots of swearing in this room. last night. Yeah, Lucille Clifton she's amazing. I love to read her work. It influences big time my poetry, but also just all of it. I think she's like really a gem that people don't talk about enough. So there's a book called Good Woman, and I think it's like probably in my top five poetry collections. I read it a lot. Let's see, what's next for you? What are you working on next? So I have this screenplay that I'm kind of I submitted it. I don't really, it's a different world, so I submitted it to a competition and it got the eye of a producer. So we're kind of like in the process of seeing how that goes. It might be, looks like that's kind of a long journey. So there's that. And then I'm finishing up my short story collection right now. I have another one that I'm in the works. And then I have a YA novel that I'd like to work on and another adult novel. Um, or, whatever you'd call it, literary novel that I think is kind of, those are playing in my mind, but they haven't been written that much. The YA novel was actually written a little bit. I was telling Raquel this, it was written a long time ago. I think I just like wanted to write a YA book and I wrote like 30,000 words. And then I think it was when I was at Vermont and then I worked on something else and it just kind of sat on the desktop for a while. So I have to bring it back to life. I think having this novel published gave me a little bit of energy. Sometimes you need that. Like the novel is such a, I think it was Mark Twain or someone who said that writing a novel is like telling a joke and then having to wait 3 years to see if anybody laughs. Um, it feels good. So the laughter feels good, and then it makes you want to do other things. So um, it gave me a tremendous amount of energy. I'm also kind of taking a breather all at the same time. I've been kind of writing furiously for a while and thought I needed to kind of organize my desk and get rid of some papers. I just kept drafts of books that have been published. I don't know why I'm keeping these drafts. I don't know if, like what writers, we need to figure out what we do with all this paper because I print everything out. So I'm trying to like reorganize and reset. Maybe in November start some projects. All right. Coffee or tea or both? Oh, for me, it's purely coffee, really. I've only had tea like, I don't know, probably under 100 times in my life. And it's usually when I'm ill. So I have a bad association with it, but also just not enough caffeine. People are like, oh, try the green tea, try the other stuff. It's not enough. But maybe one day. And then I'm very particular about the coffee too. Become my father with that. He travels with a French press, and I always made fun of him, and now I'm doing the same thing. We become the people we make fun of. That's what I've realized in life. Yes, I love the YA too, and I like writing from children's point of view. I've done it for a lot of my short stories, even, and the novel has Theo in there, and I like writing from like teenager and young people's point of view a lot. I work with a lot of kids, so I think it's kind of a good fit for that. Any advice for discouraged writer writing such? Yeah, it is. Writing is really maddening, you know. Um, I would say, you know, keep the main thing with writing, and just plug away at your work as much as you can because, um, like, it really just hinges on if you're writing or not. And people are always quick to tell you um, how hard things are in life. That's like people's favorite thing to do. If you're going to climb a mountain, if you're going to go snowboarding, if you're going to get braces, it's going to be painful, it's going to be horrible. And that's fair to say, but your odds for getting things published and making a career in writing or however you want to do it, or a hobby, or getting things published, they go up significantly if you write. And that's really the only way to get it done. And I see lots of writers sometimes talking about a new Chromebook or a new Mac or whatever it is, or a new website or headshots. And it's like that's all fine and dandy, but like if you're not writing, those things just don't happen. So, it's you have to keep plugging away at it and just you know a little a day. It's kind of amazing that you see a book of 80,000 words and you think, oh my God, like that must take forever, and it kind of does, but it also goes a lot faster than people think. I think if you're writing 1,000 words a day, 80,000 words comes in 80 days. And that's not that long. That's 3 months, less than 3 months. So, and if you're writing 500 words a day, it becomes, 6 months. So, to have a draft of a novel in 6 months is like, it's very doable. I really believe in that, like little chunks. The tree falls with, you have to continue to swing the axe every day. That's all. And I really believe in kind of that style, and also, being nice to yourself, and the rejection that comes with it is certainly there, and not to take it personally and just to kind of keep going. I think that's uh that's the only way to go. Just to plug away and try to hang around people who stoke your fire and believe in you, and say encouraging things, and not always people that are like you're the greatest human being ever, although those people are nice to have around. But people who genuinely believe in you, and like if there's a lot of like wet blankets around you that are always saying negative things, you can kind of just learn to smile at them, and then go back with people who stoke your fire. I certainly remember people saying like, "Oh, good luck with your little book," and I know people didn't really mean it in like a negative way, but it stuck with me for a while. Um, and I just kind of like returned to being around people who were always encouraging and kind, and that helps. So, the wet blankets, like, that don't let someone else's failures or situations they're going through impact your own. That's like, you got this. I agree with you, Rika. I think they're kind of, uh, I don't know, people like bringing people down sometimes, and seeing people go for what they want to do kind of just sometimes maybe reminds them that they didn't go for it. So there's like this weird thing where they have to do it. And I think just getting more and more familiar with what that looks like and how you handle that. We've all had those lunches, and it's just like, okay, it's very nice to be able to take in that information and kind of stay positive, and then just like reset yourself. And, it becomes eventually, I think if you do the writing enough, it becomes like the only way to live. I know that I'm just a better person when I do it. So I try to do a little bit every day. I try to take weekends off now. I used to work through the weekends, but now I put in 5 days. I used to be very intense with my page limit and things like that. And now I just, if I'm feeling like writing 5 pages, I do. If I feel like writing three, I do. I just try to give myself a couple hours, and whatever happens in those 2 hours is fine for me. So your routine will change, jobs change, lives change. So you don't be like crazy hard on yourself. But I do think once you turn on the faucet, keep it on, it does stay on a little bit, um, more more frequent. It's kind of like working out. Once you get in that zone, people say, like, "Oh, I love working out. I feel good afterward." It's the exact same way I feel about writing. So I think that you kind of have to foster that habit. This was so fun, and I hope you enjoyed yourself and got something out of this. Um, I certainly enjoyed it, and thank you for being here with the cacti and the knives. All right, bye everyone. Thank you for everything.